Right. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to our August webinar on patient-focused medical product development. Today, we'll be discussing some real-world case examples. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, this is a webinar of the National Health Council, and we're an organization in Washington, D.C. We work on behalf of patients with chronic conditions, and here are listed our patient advocacy group members. So the outline for today's webinar, we'll be going over just some background information, reintroducing the webinar series. Since it's been a little while, we took a break from March until now as we've been focusing on COVID programming, but we want to get back to our series. We will go over the objectives for today's webinar. Then I'll introduce our guest speakers. They'll provide an introduction to a systematic approach to patient engagement within a company, go over some case examples, and then we'll have Q&A. So if you have any questions during the duration of the webinar, please go ahead and type it into the chat function of the Zoom meeting. And also just a reminder for everybody that please keep yourself on mute during the webinar. We really appreciate it. The webinar is being recorded and an archived version will be available on our website within the next couple of days. Next slide. All right, so for many of you, I saw many familiar names who have joined us throughout the series will know. We started this webinar series in 2018 actually, and the original focus of the webinar series was to introduce the patient community specifically to clinical outcome assessments. And so we featured for the first year a number of different topics related to clinical outcome assessment, such as patient-reported outcomes or clinician-reported outcomes, and all of those are available on our website. For 2020, we decided that we wanted to start covering some additional topics that weren't necessarily under the COA umbrella. And so we started this year with a webinar on a look at rare disease listening sessions. We covered observer reported versus proxy reported outcomes, and then also introduced the role of patient reported data and outcomes-based contracts. All of these different webinars are available on our website. We also have a corresponding blog for each of them, so feel free to take a look at those. Next slide. And then I also wanted to flag for everyone, especially given the topic of today's webinar, is that we have been capturing a number of case examples on our website over the past year or so. And so we have been looking to our members to submit real-world case examples where patient engagement and patient input has made an impact in a medical product development plan. And so we currently have 16 of those on our website and really welcome folks to submit any examples you have. They can be large-scale examples, or they might be just examples when patient input had a small change to a development plan, but they're all really helpful for those of us interested in patient engagement in medical product development. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have a little bit of information about how you can submit a case example as well. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today's webinar is to describe how companies are moving from an ad hoc approach to a more systematic patient engagement approach. So we'll have one specific case example that comes from Boehringer Ingelheim about the approach that they've taken. And then we'll hear about some real life case examples where patient input has made a tangible difference in drug development. So we're really excited. And again, if you have any questions throughout the duration of the webinar, please feel free to submit those through the chat. And we have dedicated time at the end where we'll take those questions. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with some quick introductions of our speakers. In case you don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Earle, and I'm Senior Director of Research and Programs here at the National Health Council. And our guest speakers today, we're very excited to have some of our members presenting. We have Keri Yale, who's the Head of Patient Affairs and Engagement at Boehringer Ingelheim. And she leads a team focused on initiatives to foster a patient-focused culture, advancing the science of patient input, and developing best practices and standards for patient engagement at BI. She has more than 28 years of experience within the pharmaceutical industry, and 22 of those have been in patient advocacy. So thank you so much, Keri, for joining us. We also have Dr. Hilary Wilson, who is the Director of Patient Affairs and Engagement at Boehringer Ingelheim. And she has more than 10 years of experience in patient-centered research and specializes in evidence generation to support the overall value of a medical product from the patient's perspective. And she supports the advancement of patient engagement methods and approaches and the evolution of the organization's systematic approach to patient-focused drug development. So thank you so much, Hilary, for joining us as well. And finally, I have Trisha Devlin, who's the Senior Director of Patient Value at Dermira, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Eli Lilly. And she has expertise in patient advocacy, centricity, engagement, and she works with a number of dermatology advocacy groups to help support patient and healthcare needs of the community. So we're really excited to first turn it over to the team from BI to hear about your approach, and then turn it over to Trisha. So thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks to National Health Council for having us today. As Elizabeth mentioned, Hilary and I work at Boehringer Ingelheim in a center of excellence called Patient Affairs and Engagement. And we're going to talk a bit about the progress that we've made systematically incorporating patient input into our drug development process. I'm sure those of you from industry have similar stories, so hopefully we have plenty of time to discuss and learn from you as well. We'll end with a couple of examples of patient engagement in practice. But I thought I'd start with if you can go to the next slide, sorry. A little bit about our evolution. So we have a long history of working with patients and patient groups, beginning back to the 90s with the HIV community. And that was work that I led way back when. In fact, when Elizabeth said how many years of experience I have, I kind of cringe to hear that number at this point. But it's definitely been a great experience to be a part of this evolution. And about 10 years after our HIV team, we, as a company, established a centralized function called Patient Advocacy Relations, known as PAR, dedicated to really working directly with the advocacy groups, but this time across all disease areas that BI works in. And over the past decade, the scope of the function has really evolved. I'm sure that's similar for many companies joining today, and also as advocacy group representatives, you've probably seen companies evolve as well. But we've really expanded to include a global PAR function that sits in Ingelheim, Germany, to really address more with patient engagement across the life cycle. Also, our PAR team in the US started working with professional medical associations, and then work that I'll talk about where we're really interested in enhancing our company culture, because we believe that that's really instrumental to advancing this work as well. Next slide. So while we were initially focused on work directly with patient advocacy groups and then professional medical associations, over time we gained an increased focus on patient engagement. And I think probably many of you, as this was true for us, we were gaining patient insights. We weren't necessarily calling it patient engagement. So I feel like in the last 5 years, it's really become more recognized by the term that's being used. And we recognize the opportunity within the advocacy function because the work that they were doing directly with patient advocacy groups, and because all of you in patient advocacy groups work so directly with the patients. And so the most recent change from that sort of strategic facilitation of patient engagement and working directly with the groups is our addition of a center of excellence called Patient Affairs and Engagement. And that's the team that Hilary and I are a part of. Next slide. So we established this just about 2 years ago, really to accomplish 3 things: to enhance our patient-centric culture. And when we talk about patient centricity, we really think of it as being about our company culture and our mindset, and how do we help employees feel connected to the fact that all of our work across all employees connects to transforming patients' lives. Secondly, we wanted to advance our patient engagement methods and approaches. And then lastly, to build systematic process to support both patient-centric organizational culture and also patient engagement. So while we've been facilitating these activities across the life cycle for about 5 years, we recognized that to truly be a patient-focused organization, we needed to build more of a systematic approach, and particularly to directly integrate these insights into our process and our milestone decisions. So Hilary's the Director of Patient Engagement in the team, and she's going to share some of the work with you that we've done to really advance the process around patient engagement. Next slide. So when we were thinking about what we would share with you and talking about what we really believe has advanced patient engagement at BI, we think it's 3 key elements: people, process, and progress. And we're going to talk a little bit about each over the next few slides. So next slide. So leadership support is critical. Really, champions embedded across the organization is critical. But let's start with leadership. I think having leadership as vocal and visible supporters, which I'm sure many of you do, is so important. And we really feel that this year we've had more of that than ever. So our leaders were very supportive of patient centricity, very supportive of patient engagement, but we were able to conduct an offsite with them and do a workshop and really from that develop a strategy and some initiatives. So it's really enabled them to be more involved, and I think that's advanced our leaders as vocal and visible supporters, which has been key. And next is at the project team level. So I know every company is organized a little bit differently, but for BI, we align therapeutically, and those teams come together from cross-functional representation to talk about the different milestones and decisions that need to be made. And what's happening at this level is that the patient is talked about as equally as in the past the healthcare provider or the payer may have been, really making sure that the patient experience the unmet need and all questions that the team might have are being addressed. And then the next phase, and really it's not next, it's just in addition to, are our patient champions. And this is where we refer to them as the boots on the ground. These are individuals that are identified across the organization. It's considered a development opportunity. It's a 2-year responsibility. And these individuals really serve as champions within their teams. So we give them information in order to help them be informed and to inform others. So you can see here, for us, it's not just about having that leadership buy-in, but it's really building champions across the organization so that it isn't just us from PA&E and PAR talking about the importance of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Hilary, and she's going to talk more about advancing our process. Hilary?
Thanks, Keri. So on the next slide, as Keri mentioned, at BI we've been facilitating patient engagement for many years, but it really wasn't only maybe 2018, a couple years ago, that we started to look at how we could establish processes to ensure that patient insights were being integrated throughout the life cycle across all TAs. The process improvements, first we focused on developing tools that would enable the project and product teams to ask the right questions of patients at the right time using the best methods. So the patient-focused framework was launched in 2018 that did just that. So it outlined the opportunities for gaining patient insights across the full life cycle from research through to post-approval, and the potential methods that teams could use to generate those insights. Later this year, we actually have a patient-focused and clinical development guidance that's going to be rolled out in our global organization. And this is really exciting because in that guidance, there's actually expectations and standards for the integration of patient insights throughout the clinical development process. So in just a 2-year period, going from describing the opportunities, at least within clinical development, now it's not just a nice to have, to gather patient insights to inform decision making, but it's actually a standard and an expectation that all project teams are doing this. Second, we focused on establishing processes to ensure that patients that did work with BI always had a very consistent positive experience. We feel if we want to be a patient-centric organization, that the greatest test of that is that patients consistently report that they're having a good positive experience when they interact with us, as well as with our products and services. Some of those processes include, we now have a standard US patient agreement for all of our patient engagement activities, as well as a patient review committee, which reviews the different patient engagement activities and can provide recommendations for them. Finally, most recently, we've focused on establishing more standards for the reporting of our patient engagement activities and ensuring that those are integrated into the templates for all of our other existing core documents. Because if we collect the insights, but we're not actually integrating them into the documents and processes that inform the decision-making, throughout the growth of the program, then we aren't really achieving patient-focused drug development. So you'll see here that some of these are described as US, some are described as global, and some are kind of both. Keri and I do work within the US organization, but I think we all know that drug development, it doesn't happen, in any specific region. It's a global effort. And so a lot of these have required really close collaboration with our global colleagues. But there are instances where some of the processes will be regionally specific. For example, our patient agreement and our patient review committee, we're beholden to the standards in the US, legal and compliance. So that's just a specific US process. On the next slide, tracking patient engagement has been really key to advancing our approach, but our approach to tracking has also evolved over time. In 2017, the team established a frequency-based patient engagement metric, and so this actually reported on a quarterly basis the percentage of planned patient engagement activities that were completed. And this was reported to our human pharma leadership team because they really wanted to encourage project teams to adopt patient engagement. They wanted to make sure that it was happening, but they also wanted to know if teams were encountering barriers around budget or legal and compliance concerns, so that if they needed to kind of weigh in, they were able to do that. At the end of last year, we recognized that patient engagement had been steadily increasing, but we wanted to have more detailed information to inform process improvement further. So I did a qualitative analysis of all the data that was in our patient engagement tracker, and using the results from that, developed a new reporting structure. So this year we launched our patient engagement report, and this reports not only the frequency of the patient engagement activities, but also the frequency by disease area and by stage and development. So this enables our leadership to also ensure that it's happening consistently across all disease areas, and have a better understanding, are the activities designed more to inform research, development, or post-approval. We use the data in this tracker for an annual evaluation, so we can identify our progress and our gaps and help us strategize for the second year or the subsequent year. On the next slide, this just shows you the kind of information that we include in our patient engagement tracker. This is from the 2019 annual report. So we had an over 50% growth in the frequency of patient engagement activities from 2018 to 2019, and these supported 25 different disease areas. Most commonly, the activities were supporting clinical development programs. So for 2020, we do have some initiatives that are focused specifically on patient engagement and research and post-approval, because we recognize that that was certainly an area that we had room for improvement. As many of you know, in the field of patient engagement, we often talk about the different levels of engagement. So at the most basic level, patients can be informants. They can also review. As you move up that ladder, patients can co-create, and they can also be the driving force of activities. So when it's the driving force, we BI are the participant, and it becomes an engagement activity that we track when the individuals that are representing BI in that particular activity bring the insights gained from that activity and share them across the broader project team and have a discussion about how to integrate those insights into their decisions. You can see from 2019, more than half of the patient engagement activities that were facilitated were at that advisor and above level. And really, we track this information because as we gain more information over time, we do want to be able to tie the type of methods that are used and the level of engagement to better understand how those may have impacts on how those insights were turned into action. On the next slide, I'm going to share with you an example of what this looks like in practice. So recently, BI was preparing for the start of development milestone for a project in a disease area that was brand new to us. We'd never worked in. Start of development at BI is the milestone decision to trigger the first in human studies. And so as the team was preparing for start of development, the PAR therapeutic area leads were notified, we were preparing for start of development for a new disease area. And so they did all of their patient organization mapping and contact organizations globally that worked within this disease area to see if they would be interested in helping us understand more about that particular disease and provide some input on the programs that we were planning. So an advisory board was held with the different patient organization representatives that had indicated they were interested in participating. And then it started actually with one of the patient organizations presenting on the results of a survey that they had completed with their patient constituency around the experience living with the disease, their unmet needs. BI could ask some clarifying questions around that, and then BI was able to ask some questions that they were considering to inform their clinical development strategy. The insights from that activity, that ad board, as well as some other data sources were integrated into the patient report. And then that patient report was a key resource document that fed into all of the other standard documents that go into the start of development package for review. So by actually proactively planning the insight generation, working with the patient groups to define the agenda and integrating the insights directly into the documents that leadership review to make the decision, the patient engagement approach is actually systematically integrated into the drug development. So I'm going to turn it back to Keri, and she's going to share one other example of a recent patient engagement activity.
Great, thanks, Hilary. So good, you have that slide up, thank you. I'm going to talk about an example where we co-created with patients, and similar to the previous example, the team really started with understanding the disease area, and to do that, to identify the patient advocacy groups and work closely with them. They then identified both patients along with the patient advocacy group representatives and held an advisory board. And I just wanted to note that both of these examples kind of lead with an advisory board as the patient engagement method, but that's not always the case. It just so happens we picked two that started in the same way. So over several years meeting with these individuals, the team definitely had a better understanding of the patient experience and unmet needs. And something that became really clear early on was that these patients, many of them have dexterity challenges. And so opening bottles and using their hands for day-to-day tasks can be really difficult. So learning this, there was discussion around developing opening aids. And then the company was able to come up with some prototypes that then this group of patients and patient advocacy group representatives could put their hands on and give feedback about. And so over a long period of time, very iterative, they were able to come up with a solution that was much more patient-friendly and really was co-created with these patients. So I wasn't a part of this example. I'm pleased to be able to share it with you, but I think it's really a good one because it's highlighting where getting patient input early, often, and throughout, you really can lead to a better solution. And something that Hilary and I talk about a lot, and maybe many of you face this in your own companies, is that a lot of times folks want to know, well, what did the insight change? What did you learn? What did you do differently? And we understand the nature of that question and the importance of highlighting the result, and we do that often. But to us, what good really looks like is that nothing changes, because you're gaining that insight, like I said earlier, early, often, and throughout, and you're shaping it together and ultimately, helping to address better patient needs and producing something that's much more patient-centric. So I think that's our last slide before we turn it over to Trisha.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm really honored to be part of this program today and share some real-world examples along with the BI team. So my name is Trisha Devlin, and I'm part of a group that many organizations don't have. It's called Patient Value. And in the past, it's been known as the group that organizes and works with patient advocacy groups to be patient-centered, as well as to engage with patients individually. And so recently we were acquired by Eli Lilly. And so this example that I'm going to give over the next couple of minutes is an example that we led last year before our acquisition of Eli Lilly. And a little bit about Dermira and our company is we've been a company focused on dermatology, and our founders from the very beginning wanted to ensure that the patients were at the center of everything we did. And so our team in Patient Value was always thinking about how the patients were asked, how often they were asked. Did we ask parents? Did we ask children? Did we ask African Americans or Indians? Or did we ask someone who may be newly diagnosed or someone who's been diagnosed with this disease for a long time? So our team was always the person or the group that was always holding up that white flag to say, did we ask the patient? Did we ask the patient? So I think as you see this example here, this is something that came from a small company perspective. We did not have a formal process to have patient input like many of the bigger companies do. But I do want to say that organic growth and getting patient input can definitely change the trajectory of products and services, no matter how big or small a company is or how that patient input could be included. Want to go to the next slide? So many of you guys have seen a slide similar to this of integrating the patient voice. There's many opportunities. Some companies focus on late stage after the product is launched, where they engage patients for the insights of commercial activities such as brochures and videos. But more and more companies are actually starting to get more patient input early on so that we can positively change or find therapies that patients want and need. And so this chart, as I said, is probably a different version that many of us have seen in the industry, but there is opportunities to engage patients, patient advocacy groups, as well as panels to get insights into the earliest stage of development before we even formulate a product into clinical, and then later on after the commercialization. You want to go to the next slide? So our example that I'd like to share today is an example that we did. I had a very excited preclinical team a while ago that had been developing a new formulation of a product that's a topical. And for those of you guys that aren't in dermatology, a topical is something that you apply to your skin. And so many of the skin diseases that we have been working on and developing therapies for are things that people would apply to their skin, obviously. But at the same time, they were very excited about this new molecular entity that we were going to be pursuing. And the formulation, they scanned the research to understand all the different formulations that this therapy could be used for. And there were gels and creams and lotions. And so they said, well, this new formulation that we'd like to morph into, it was more like a gel and a lotion at the same time, was really novel and unique. And they were very excited to pursue it. And they came to us and said, can we just ask for 1 or 2 patients to get the insights to make sure that we're on the right track and that we're developing something based on everything we're hearing from patients. And the team had no expectations. And I think that that's important because they didn't know what patients wanted. They thought they did, but they definitely didn't have specific expectations of what they wanted. So if you'd like to advance to the next slide. So what we did before we actually took this to patients, we had an internal group of employees test 5 of the formulations that we were going to pursue. We had this gel lotion-like cream that we had bought that was probably the winner that we thought everyone was going to love. And our employees tried it. And coincidentally, they tried it on their hand and they thought, this is great. This absorbs well. This doesn't have any, has a light feeling, just exactly how our research team had actually designed it. And they said this of all these examples, number B, let's say, B was the best example that they thought all the patients were going to love. And coincidentally, we wanted to make sure that we were focused on the right formulation before we took this into later stages of development. You want to go click through the animation. There's one more box. There you go. So what we did is we hosted 2 focus groups over a period of time with people actually living with the disease. And I say that it's important because living with the disease is very different than employees who are focused on the disease that you're considering or looking into. Many of my colleagues have been in dermatology for years, and they thought that they knew what patients wanted. And even some of our physician advisors thought they knew what patients wanted. But what we found through this market research and through the venue that we hosted it at, that we found that patients didn't exactly want exactly what we thought that they wanted. And what we heard is that they shared some of their treatment, their protocol of what they do on a daily basis. They also shared packaging needs and what they wanted. And I'll get into that in a minute. But also we looked at, from a patient perspective, we looked at 13-point scale versus just a 5-point scale from the internal folks. You want to go to the next slide? So what we did is we tested the 5 different applications with the patients. And I have to say, the way that the patients actually applied the products was very different. And I should also recognize for all of my legal and regulatory folks, it was just placebo. There was no active drug in the product, in the formulation. And the patients actually put it on their hand, they put it on their arm, they put it on their neck, they put it on their hairline, they put it under their shirts. And what they did is they wanted to see how these potential products would actually work on a day-to-day life, in real life. They also wanted to smell it. None of our employees want to smell it, but it was important. The smell was very important to how patients were thinking about this product. They were also curious about the routine. They asked us questions such as, would I only apply this at night? Would I apply this under my sunscreen? Would I apply this under makeup? And where would I put this on? Could I put this all over my whole body? Would I do it more than one time? And these were all questions that were very important that we had not fully evaluated and considered at this stage of preclinicals before we got into clinical work, but very critical into the development of this product. And at the last minute, we also asked about packaging. And I have to say, many of my colleagues were thinking, a lot of these products are just going metal tubes. It's just a tube. We could do a pump, but it's just a tube. And it's really, patients aren't going to really care too much about what the packaging is, but you'll see in a second that they did care. If you want to click to the next slide. So what we heard is that we thought internally that product B, which we were evaluating of the 5, was the one that the patients were going to want. And what we found is that patients said it's way too light. And the reason why they thought it was way too light is that it was a little sticky, and they felt as though if they couldn't feel the product going on their skin, they might forget about putting it on. And that's critical into the development, because if you're not applying a product on a daily basis, you may not be able to control the disease, and you may not be able to better understand how the product could be treated. They also wanted to ensure that it would work under their foundation, under their sunscreen, or however they were applying it. So they definitely did not like our product B that we thought was going to be the greatest thing ever, but they also wanted to ensure that it was a little heavier so that they could feel it. The other part that they wanted to say is that packaging was important. And I'll give you an example. We have tested some pumps, we tested some tubes, and we tested even smaller tubes when we were evaluating some of these packaging. And like I said, my colleagues said, patients don't need to worry about packaging. But honestly, they did. And what we heard from the feedback for patients was that many of these packaging for this condition is in metal tubes. And for those of us that are either live with skin conditions or have prescriptions in metal tubes, if you're trying to inch out every little bit of your product, eventually that tube cracks. And what we heard loud and clear is that sometimes when those packages crack, they cut their fingers, and it could contaminate that prescription over time. So it was important to better understand the packaging so that what patients wanted. And even though we were thinking of tubes, and we are considering tubes, they said that packaging, if it's in an elaborate pump, they think that probably more packaging and more dollars go into the packaging than they do the product. And they wanted packaging to be minimal, and so people could throw it in the purse, throw it in their backpack, or even in their carrying case, so that they didn't know that they had or living with this condition. So I think packaging is an area where many of us in the industry had not thought of getting patient input, because it's just packaging, honestly. And what we heard loud and clear from the patients is packaging does make a difference. And even though the patients were a little tongue-in-cheek laughing, like, packaging, you want us to give us feedback on packaging, it was very critical into the development of this product. If you want to go to the next slide. And so with these insights, as I said, these insights changed the trajectory of our product development. We've developed a product that is a little bit heavier than what we originally thought. We also wanted to ensure that the formulation was what people wanted. And then also we've been working on the design of the packaging so that as we go to the FDA and we talk about the packaging and where it's going to be, it's at least that we think about this plastic packaging versus something that's the typical metal packaging. We will have to ensure that stability and all the tests are needed from a packaging perspective. But this is a positive example of where patients positively change the trajectory of this product for a skin disease that many of us live with. So I wanted to share this example. If you want to go to the next slide in summary, many of us always say these things, but can't start early enough. In small companies like I have been, we don't need a formal process. You don't necessarily need a large team. You can get patient insights early and often, and then design what you're looking for, because you may be able to achieve two goals at the same time with some exercise or project. And I would also encourage you to share these insights with advocacy groups and patients that you're talking about, because as we learn and develop these products with patients, not just for patients, but with patients, it's important because payers will always need to know at some point what was created and why you're pricing products the way you are. And the more you can show that you created these products with patients and understand them in this disease state, the better off we will be as a community. So with that, I can't say thank you enough to my team and those of us that have always been holding up that white flag to ensure that patients' voice was always included in development. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And this was my last slide. If you want to go to the next one for my conclusion. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Trisha, Keri, and Hilary. Really appreciate such great examples and insights. We've had a number of questions come in, and a number of the questions were related to the metrics, Hilary, that you were speaking about earlier. And one of the first questions was, are the best practice are best practice resources available to external organizations? And then along the same lines, if you could speak a little more about how patients have been involved in developing some of the best practices and metrics also that you're using to track those. Hilary, I think you're muted.
Thanks. So I know for the patient focused framework, which JB Smalley actually started when she was here at BI, that was largely based on the PCORI rubric, which was developed, very closely with patients. So in the framework, much of that was based on that, and then they did have patients review it at another patient summit, a BI patient summit. And they confirmed that all of the questions and opportunities for engaging with patients across the life cycle were reflected in that. In terms of the patient engagement tracker, I probably used metric, and I have metric on that slide, and I try to avoid that because metric means a lot of things to a lot of people. This is not a formal impact assessment, but it's taking kind of descriptive data about the patient engagement activities and providing more, being able to collapse it, across the different activities to describe it. So, we wanted to be able to know, are we, doing this really well in dermatology, but we're not doing anything in, diabetes, right? So that we could have some, understanding of where the patient engagement was happening, at which stage, right? So I mentioned we're doing pretty well in clinical development, but we feel like we have some more opportunities in research. And then where I described the data around the insights turning into action. This is all based on, just tracking the activities that have happened. I meet with the PAR facilitators of these patient engagement activities on a quarterly basis, and we go through all the activities that they facilitated. And then at each of those quarterly meetings, we track what decisions were directly impacted by this activity. And if we can track a specific decision or that was impacted, then that's what's included in the insights. And last year when I did a qualitative analysis of all the different ways that the patient engagement activities had informed decisions, I was able to create some different categories, like they impacted disease awareness campaigns or clinical trial campaigns. So that's how we, talk about the data. Patients were not involved in, in that particular patient engagement tracker or the development of it. But it's just a way for us to, we feel evaluate the progress that we're making over time in patient engagement and try to identify areas where we feel like we want to improve. I think I saw another question related to this. Do we know, have we looked at, do the impacts increase kind of by the level of engagement? That's not something that we have enough data to look at formally yet. I mean, it's something that we are interested in evaluating, but certainly if you talk to the project teams, Keri even mentioned in the example that she highlighted, we feel if you're kind of co-creating with patients from the beginning, often there won't be a change because, you have that level of engagement where you're listening to patients, you're asking patients, for feedback. So the product itself is being designed as something that is, going to work for patients.
And Hilary, can I just add to that? I think one of the things we found that was really important to the work that the team was doing is using the tracker to create internal awareness of both the activity and the insights so that we got more support and more belief in the value of patient engagement from leadership. So one of the things that we also do at BI is we deliver patient minutes at various leadership meetings as well as other departmental meetings, and they're very short, they're 5 minutes, but they highlight either the experience of a patient in a particular disease that we're working in or a patient engagement activity. So it's really great to be able in less than 5 minutes to capture something that particularly the leadership might not even know we learned, and it also just highlights the great work that's happening across the teams and the insights that are being collected. So we use it in a variety of ways. I know tracker can sometimes not have the best interpretation, but it's just a way to kind of capture everything, and then we have a number of ways that we leverage and talk about what it is we're doing.
Great, thank you. And then one other question, you had documented on your slide how there was an increase in activity from 2018 to 2019. And I wanted to pose this actually to also Trisha and Keri and Hilary, was if you saw a notable impact in how your company was engaging patients as a result in FDA's increased focus on patient engagement in particular. I guess that the timing sort of dovetails with some of the early guidance activity as well.
Can start. So yes, I think that the guidance that is in draft and also the recent one that came out is important, but hopefully more companies are doing this because it's important to do to get patient input into the development, not because the FDA is asking us to do it. But I think that we should be doing it more and more and highlighting these examples.
Yeah, I agree with Trisha. I don't think it was a result of that at all because Hilary has worked really diligently to educate the organization on PFDD, but it's definitely was not the driver. I think it just came from starting to really emphasize the need at the project team level and then including the conversation and the discussion point around patient specific questions and understanding patient experience, patient unmet need, and then really just I think talking about it, you show, well, what's that TA doing and what's this TA doing? And you start to build some momentum, maybe even a little healthy competition, which is always good.
I would also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Hilary.
Oh, go ahead, Trisha, please.
I was just going to also add that I think that there's a lot of buzz in the industry right now about patient centricity. There's multiple conferences throughout the year, National Health Council, as well as bio does a really nice job of highlighting about patients and patient centricity. But more of the advocacy groups are asking us in the industry, like, what did you do to get patient input and how did you make those decisions? So I think it's a holistic evolution over the last 2 years that we're thinking more about patients and being held accountable to get those insights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you can't point to any one thing. I mean, even, the framework, which was launched in 2018, in a lot of ways, that was just another tool to advance the conversation and continue to educate the organization on the opportunities for patient engagement. I mean, I, can't tell you that I've looked at the framework in the last 7 or 8 months, because after, people, start to understand what patient engagement is, they don't go back to that reference as much, but having that framework and being able to have workshops and get in front of many different teams and talk about it and provide examples, it just becomes real. And around that time in the US, the US leadership had endorsed it, creating this Patient Affairs and Engagement Center of Excellence. So I think there's just been this kind of growing organic advancement of it at BI.
Great, thank you. Another question was if you could speak a little bit about what patient organizations can do to help address anything that you don't feel like you can achieve from within industry, or simply complementary approaches that can help out.
Trisha, do you want to start, or do you?
Sure, I was smiling because I have a couple examples from my dermatology partnerships that I think that we can share, but I think that market research is always great, and those are a data point in hand, but sharing and as an appropriate what that market research may say with advocacy groups to complement the community and the understanding is critically important. The only way we can grow together is if we work hand in hand. But I think that there's a lot of resources that out there that we may think, well, we'll just do research or we'll talk to some patients. But the more we work with hand in hand with the advocacy groups, the better we can grow together.
Yeah, and I would just add, we started, and I mentioned having started with the HIV community. And so what I really enjoy is seeing how sophisticated all the patient advocacy groups are today and how many offerings exist. I don't really ever think of it as a comparison, but I think learning about what the group can do and how they're engaging with their constituents is always key. And then sometimes even I put the onus back on us to share what we're seeing from other groups. So I think a real area of opportunity with partnership is just around clinical trials. It continues to be a very difficult area, particularly in recruiting diverse patients, and anything that we can do together to create awareness and to ensure that at least patients know that it's an option for them. I see that as a really big opportunity. And I know there's some groups that are creating some clinical trial liaisons and have some really advanced approaches, and that's exciting to see. The other is being able to identify, because you have such close contact with patients, and knowing where their level of expertise is, because we want to have patients opine on our protocols and we want to get their feedback on certain aspects. And so you really help us to know who the right people are based on knowing their experience living with the disease or participating in clinical trials. So we really rely on your expertise in knowing the people and the patients that would be the best folks for us to consult with.
Another question is if you could offer some suggestions of how to handle situations where maybe you've received great patient feedback, but there might be internal resistance to adopting the ideas, for example, from management within your organization.
Yeah, do you guys want to start this one?
Well, I'll tell you the biggest point I heard for years was we're not going to be able to change anything, so why should we ask? And I don't think that that was truth. I think that was just a lack, and this goes back many, many years, but I think it was a lack of understanding and fully appreciating how much could be learned. And then as that changed over time, I don't think there was as much resistance. I think we don't have resistance. I think that encouraging the team to say and be open about the things that maybe can't be changed and why is really important to level set. And also encouraging the teams to think about it early enough, because I know when we first started doing this, a lot of times they would come to us and say, okay, we're on board. We would love patient input and we need it tomorrow. Well, that's not practical, and it's certainly not patient-centric. So getting everyone and kind of building that momentum within the project teams for us has been really important, to making sure there's enough time, managing expectations, and then creating a very patient-centric conversation, which is just, it's not even patient-centric, it's really just mutual respect, where you're managing expectations and having an honest conversation about what you can and can't do.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back, to the stories that I've heard you tell, Keri, even from before I joined, because I've only been with BI for 2 years now, but even in the 2 years I've been here, now it's just, you don't have teams kind of asking or pushing back, well, we don't want to ask. It's like, yes, we want to hear, so that we can, help get patient insights to inform our decision making. But, in the early days, it was kind of just doing it and finding the patient champions, the people that really were supportive of this, and working with them and having the examples, so that you could show management, look at the success, right? And then just slowly over time, kind of changing people's minds. I think the other thing that helps is being able to really proactively plan. I mean, if you have your project team that has kind of reviewed, what is available, and identified the gaps, and they have a plan for how they're going to engage with patients, patient organizations, et cetera, throughout, it makes it a lot easier, because it's just kind of built into the process.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that we've been trying to help with this is also simply by collecting case examples and trying to host, these types of opportunities for folks, so that even if it may not be an internal example within your company, that you can cite your competitors in some cases that are doing really great work, and kind of use that to drive some conversations. Another question is with regards to engagement of family caregivers, and if anyone would be able to speak to some case examples where you've engaged family caregivers.
I can actually comment on something that we did actually last year with the National Eczema Association. We actually, with them, organized a roundtable with caregivers to better understand the impact and the needs of children and adolescents living with eczema. And what we thought is we thought we knew a lot about eczema as a patient, but the struggle and the mental burden and the stress that parents have in living with this condition and thinking about treatments for their children is very different. And so it created another opportunity for us and to work with other advocacy groups, as well as to recognize that there is an unmet need that we had not been fully capturing, to better understand the caregivers and how they're struggling or living or managing with these conditions and diseases. So it's a big opportunity for a lot of partners, and an area that really has not been better understood.
I've also seen with the PAR therapeutic area leads, when they're planning patient engagement activities through patient organizations, a lot of the times that's something that the patient organization brings up, and if they say, we really feel strongly that you guys need to get caregiver input as well, then, absolutely that's done. I don't do the patient engagement as frequently as the PAR therapeutic area lead teams do, because my role is a little bit different. but I do get to see a lot of the, you know, activities just because I'm kind of tracking them and hearing about them.
Yeah, when we created our process for bringing the patient voice into BI, it was considered the patient and the caregiver. So we talk about them as being important, just as hearing the individual who's living with a particular condition.
Great, thank you. And I noticed a question about if the slides will be shared. We'll be sharing a recording of the webinar on our website, and then we'll also have a corresponding blog as well. So the presentation will be available afterwards.
Hi, this is Jessica Scott. Was the question before on to what extent patient engagement has involved family members or children, care partners? Is that the previous question? I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
Yes, so the previous question was about how family caregivers have been involved.
Yeah, so I can address, was that open to the broader group if there were any examples?
Sure, I think folks would love to hear any examples.
Okay, yeah, so at Takeda, we have conducted at this point 3 different advisory boards where we have had pediatric participants. The advisors who were from 10 and up were the individuals living with the condition, and then a parent care partner was also present. We've had quite a number of advisory boards where we have had individuals living with a condition plus a care partner, both attending or just care partners. Great insights from each of those experiences. We have really been quite amazed with the contribution from the pediatric advisors. That was a surprise and a push to get through our legal and ethics and compliance colleagues to think innovatively and creatively about gaining these perspectives and the value that would contribute. For example, in one ad board, we learned from an adolescent advisor about her ability to do home infusions independently since age 10. And that really impacted the global programs team's thoughts about the upcoming study design. And so, yeah, lots of great feedback from care partners and pediatric advisors. And another in a severe mental health disorder indication, we met with care partners and had insights that helped us design a better study that would provide the kind of engagement and incentives during the trial that would reinforce participation from the individuals living with the condition. So those are a few examples.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Those are great examples. So we'll definitely be doing more of these webinars to highlight and share examples from the community. I know we're at time. We didn't get to all the questions, but I wanted to go to the next slide, which has everybody's well, we have a template also for submitting your own case examples. So please go ahead, submit case examples. We love these. They're super helpful for everybody involved in patient-focused drug development or medical device development. Can go to the next slide, please. Maybe even the next one after this. I wanted to make sure to share everybody's email address because we didn't get through all the questions. I know there were a few specific ones directed at individuals, so everybody's contact information's here. Please do feel free to reach out, and as I mentioned before, we'll be archiving a recording of this webinar on our website. So take a look on our website and you'll be able to review anything that you want to review once more. But with that, thank you so much, Keri, Hilary, and Trisha for presenting. We really appreciate it. Learned a lot, and thanks for all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.